Policymakers are discussing lowering the central bank's inflation target. That's according to Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago. He says that the move would make South Africa more competitive and bring the SARB in line with peers. Kganyago also stated that his personal preference would be to lower the target this year. But this may not be possible as teams from the Reserve Bank and National Treasury are still identifying the risks associated with such a move and how to mitigate them. The current target range is between 3 and 6%. Corruption remains a problem in South Africa. According to a report from Corruption Watch, the body has received more than 46,900 complaints of alleged corruption since its inception more than 12 years ago. This equates to an average of 12 reports a day from various parts of the country. In 2023 alone, the organization received 2,110 reports. Corruption Watch says the predominant types of corruption are maladministration, fraud, employment irregularities, and bribery. And these incidents are concentrated in the Gauteng metros of Johannesburg and Tshwane, as well as the Cape Town metro. South Africa's upcoming national election is looming large in the minds of CEOs. That's according to the Merchant Tech CEO Confidence Index. The data shows that a significant number of leaders expressed a desire for change, with some calling for economic reforms and a pivot away from ideologies seen as detrimental to market freedom. When asked whether the ANC's support will fall below 50% in the elections, an overwhelming 79.7% of CEOs indicated that they believe it will. Anticipation of an ANC-led coalition has raised concerns about further entrenching anti-business sentiment, which could worsen the outlook for South Africa. Woolworths has completed the acquisition of Absolute Pets. That's after all the conditions to the deal were fulfilled. The retailer believes pet care is a fast-growing market with substantial growth potential. Absolute Pets has about 150 stores across South Africa, including online pet spas and pet services. The value of the deal has not been disclosed. Transaction Capital says all the conditions for the unbundling of used car dealer WeBuyCars have been met, and the private listing will go ahead as expected. This means that the JSE will welcome the company to the bourse next week, Thursday. Transaction Capital will use the funds it's raised from the WeBuyCars unbundling to reduce its debt pile. Southern Palladium says the pre-feasibility study at its Bengwenyama project is advancing with more than 30,000 meters of drilling completed. The project, which contains more than 70% of the world's known platinum group metal resources, has the potential to produce palladium, rhodium, platinum, and iridium. The firm has also indicated that the environment impact assessment is also progressing well and remains on schedule to be submitted for the review by the middle of this year. That assessment is a core component of the group's mining right application. In international news, Intel disclosed deepening operating losses for its foundry business, a blow to the chip maker as it tries to regain a technology lead it lost in recent years to Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing. Here's more detail in this package report.
Intel says it faces deepening losses at its chip-making unit. The tech giant said that the foundry business, which makes chips for itself and other firms, faced a deficit of $7 billion in 2023, well up on a year before. Revenues also tumbled, dropping by close to a third. In a presentation to investors, Chief Executive Pat Gelsinger said this year would be even worse. But he said the unit would get back to break-even by 2027. Gelsinger says the business has been weighed down by bad decisions. That includes a failure to use the most advanced types of chip-making machines. Intel has had to outsource more production as a result. The company has now bought the advanced extreme ultraviolet machines made by Dutch firm ASML and says it will regain competitiveness as a result. It also now plans to spend $100 billion on building or expanding chip plants in the US. But a business turnaround for the foundry will depend on persuading other firms to use its manufacturing services. Intel has lagged rivals TSMC and Samsung in that market.
And Germany is exploring its options when it comes to implementing a 4-day work week. Let's cross over to our reporter Anati Ndevu with more.
Well, that's right, Zinati. EU's workforce is still witnessing ongoing talks about the notable shift in working hours. That's a 35-hour labor shift that consists of a 4-day work week with no salary deductions. Now, Lars Halter, who's with Deutsche Welle in Berlin, who has been following the discussions quite closely, joins us now. Lars, what are the details?
Thanks for having me. Well, it all started with these train strikes that have been frustrating Germans for months now. The train drivers' union had demanded that they would get to work a 35-hour work week, make the same money as before, and Germany's state-owned rail provider had made it clear from the beginning that this would be untenable. Too expensive, they said, and even worse, they barely have enough staff as it is, so cutting people's work week would make it even more difficult to keep the trains running. And yet, after several strikes and long discussions, the union recently got what they wanted, a 35-hour work week. And that has now increased interest in that idea for many others. The idea to work less for the same pay obviously appeals to many, and some companies are happy to oblige because they have realized that in an environment where few people are available for lots of open positions, they will have to do something to make themselves more attractive as employers.
And Lars, with this attracting other sectors, how would this pan out for the economy?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question, of course. Even those economists who are generally for a shorter work week, for the reasons I've just mentioned, there seems to be one hang-up. They say it can only be done, quote, where it's economically feasible. And while that might be the case for some companies, like I heard of a roofer who says they can get their work done in 4 long days and take Friday off, well, most of it will certainly not work for an entire nation. This whole concept there, because it would translate into millions of hours not worked after all, and that would be a tremendous loss in productivity. To make up for that, productivity per hour would have to jump, and it hasn't over the past few years. It rather inches up very slowly, growing at around 1% per year. Now, some economists have calculated productivity in Germany to drop by around 5% if we had a 35-hour week. And that again would translate, of course, into losses in gross domestic product. It's really strange to even discuss this at a time when the German economy isn't doing very well anyway. We've just had a recession. Currently, we are not seeing much economic growth. And again, looking at productivity and the workforce, we're heading into a few really challenging years. The baby boomers are retiring now. That's an extremely strong generation. And they are replaced by a generation that numbers way fewer people. So fewer people working fewer hours. I just don't see how this could possibly work.
And based off of economic pressures in the EU, fewer people working less hours, it seems like the contrary should be happening there, Lars.
Well, right now, I can't imagine anyone making huge steps towards a shorter work week, aside from some companies, like I mentioned, that might be able to afford it based on their very own individual situation. Most other companies, however, and the German government too, by the way, will have to eventually face one reality they won't like. If we are planning to make changes to our work week, it might have to go the other way. Maybe in future, we'll have to actually work more hours instead of fewer hours. And just looking at some of the other countries here in Europe, that thought isn't far-fetched. Most of our other countries, including our neighbors in France or the Czech Republic, work more hours, as do the Greeks. And remember, they just managed to get over a devastating economic crisis over the past few years by working, not by striking.
Well, let's leave it there for now. Thank you for those insights. That was Deutsche Welle's Lars Halter.